You're listening to another episode of Captain Vince The Early Years. This is one I've been really apprehensive about putting back out there because it's a little controversial, and I have a very different take on this topic now. Most of our third podcasts cover the topic of video games as an art form, a question that Vince and I both answered at the time with a resounding no. I don't think we approached this quite right. We were really on about the idea that video games aren't the right platform for storytelling because stories are inherently not interactive experiences and are just a backdrop to make action happen in a video game. Now, since then, I've had my mind change significantly, both on the idea of video games as a narrative form and really on the notion of interactive art. I've spoken on this topic a lot since then, especially in my Arkham Asylum and Arkham City rewinds, and I think I have a much more well-considered and open-minded approach to the whole thing now, and I'd say Vince does too. So as always, remember that we're older, maybe a tick wiser, and not precisely the guys we were back when we first posted this podcast for all 12 of our listeners, including ourselves, back on December 5th, 2008, and the opinions expressed in this podcast aren't necessarily those we hold now. I hope it's an interesting listen for you, and enjoy.
It's time for Geek Speak the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Christopher Walken.
No, you're not. You're Vince.
I'm Vince. I'm Vince-topher Walken.
You're not Vince-topher Walken. Well, welcome once again to Geek Speak the podcast, the podcast where we talk about everything except for the stuff we don't care about.
That's confusing.
Let's take a look at the weekend box office, Vince.
Ooh.
4 Christmases topped it off at 31 million.
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
I think it's really that people have no other choice, really. They don't really... I think the reason is, it's getting to be Christmas time, and they just want to go see something Christmassy because they don't have any other good alternatives.
And it has Christmas in the title, and so they go and see it.
That's right.
That's right. Well, Bolt was in second place at 26, which is a pretty good second weekend. For that, Bolt, not Pixar. I repeat, not Pixar. Disney,
but it is Disney.
But it's not Pixar. Twilight did 26 its second weekend as well, and that's not bad either. Sadly, it's still doing well, Vince.
Yeah. Then again, we haven't seen it. It's just you can keep it on faith that it's terrible.
I think we've decided though that we're gonna go see it, and we're gonna tell you guys how bad we think it is. That's what we're gonna do. Sadly, Australia, its opening weekend bombed. 14 million, 5th place. I think a large part of that. Neither of us have seen it. I intend to see that one this weekend. But I think a large part of that is cultural differences, because I've been reading a lot of Australian literature lately, and American-Australian culture is just so radically different. It's amazing. I think there's closer things between British and American pop culture than there is between Australian and American pop culture. Yeah, but I mean, it's Australian actors, but I think it's an American movie.
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
I think the creative team is Australian, but I can't say that.
It just looks like a movie made for America. I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, neither one of us has seen it. We'll do it. But I mean, what I've been told. Vince and I have an American Lit course together, and our professor was telling us about it. He said it was like a modern day Gone with the Wind, which is a very American movie. I mean,
that's true, and that's a little insane.
So obviously, even though it's about Australia, it's what I'm saying is I think the filmmaking is probably very American.
That could be. Could be.
But I guess we'll find out. Anyway, everybody that's seen it has told me that it's really good, and I feel bad for it that's not doing so well. This is the first movie Hugh Jackman's been in that hasn't done so hot. So, as far as I know, or have there been things? Well, I don't know. He was in. What was that pseudo horror picture he did? It wasn't horror. It was just a. What was it? Well, what was that thing? You know what I'm talking about, right?
No.
With vampires and werewolves and crap in it.
Oh, Van Helsing?
Van Helsing, yeah, that was it. That couldn't have done so great.
I own that movie.
Did you like it?
I
don't like that movie, man.
It was cute.
Yeah, that was my problem with it.
It was kind of funny, and I kind of enjoyed it. Not necessarily that it's good or artistic or anything. It's just funny.
It's really interesting how much times have changed, because 14 million right now is a terrible opening weekend. But I was looking through some of that stuff you gave me for Christmas, Vince, and there was an old article from 1982 about Wrath of Khan, and Wrath of Khan was when the weekend it opened. That was the biggest opening in history. 14 million.
Hot dang.
Isn't that interesting? 1982. So I don't know. I don't know if that's all inflation. I know a lot of it's inflation. I don't know if it how much it has to do with population increase and stuff like that. But it's kind of funny because 1982 doesn't feel like that long ago. At least okay. So I wasn't alive yet, but
neither of us were alive.
No,
at that point.
but all I mean is it doesn't seem like 25, 28 years would be enough to where 14 million versus 119 is a giant weekend. You know what I mean? So
yes.
Well, our topic of conversation this week is going to be whether or not video games can be an art form. What do you think, Vince? Are video games an art form?
Well, I would say overarching no, but I would say that there are things about video games that are artistic in essence. Like, well, first of all, we can start with the obvious aspect of it, which is the visual aspect. I mean, there are many games that are visually striking, and they are always coming up with new leaps and bounds in their electronics and their technology to be realistic or just strikingly beautiful. I think the one that would probably have to be the most reasonable pick would be any Final Fantasy games. Those ones seem to be on the cutting edge of technology at any given time.
Sure, and are pretty and have nice drawings
and are extremely not fun to play if you don't like turn-based RPGs.
Yeah, before we go any farther in this conversation, why don't we preface this by saying, first of all, neither Vince or I are giant gamers.
This is true.
We don't play a lot of video games. We play video games.
Yes.
We don't play them because we think they're an art form. We play them because they're fun, and you and I have attention spans of, like, a Lego.
Lego!
So, well, I don't want to speak for you, Vince, but...
A Lego. Well, you see, my attention span is even less than that, because you can connect Legos.
There's a connection.
That's right.
And so, a lot of people that play video games like to play for hours at a time, and I like to stick in Mario 3 for half an hour and then go eat pizza or something. You know what I mean? Like I don't like to spend that much time on one thing usually.
True.
Except for my writing and stuff, my work I can spend a long time on. But as far as entertainment, I like to bounce around.
That's right. I'm pretty much the same way. I like games that you can get into, play a bit, and leave. You don't have to defeat the evil boss genius just to save the game that it takes 10 hours to get to.
Yeah, exactly.
And it drives me nuts.
And then the other thing we gotta say is that neither Vince or I are giant role-playing game fans, which is probably evident by the fact that we don't like to sit in front of a TV for 3 hours playing video games.
I just don't see the draw of 10 hours of whacking droids with a vibro blade before you can get a lightsaber. I don't get it.
Okay, well, we're getting a little bit off topic, but I think, okay, so what is it for you, Vince, that makes it difficult to see how video games might be an art form?
Well, I think most art forms, film, prose, anything that has any sort of entertainment value that can be considered art, is heavily bent on timing. I mean, in our fiction class, we've been talking a lot about slowing down the narrative, and in a movie, everything is about timing.
Right. And in a video game, who controls the timing?
It's going to be the player.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only person who has any control. Of course, they have the cutscenes where they take you out of the action and then have some dude or some chick say, "Hey, we're gonna have a cutscene now."
And that's where the writing comes in. That's where the person who writes the video game writes the plot for you. And you have to have a plot in a lot of video games just to tie the whole thing together, just to give you a point for going to the place and doing the thing that you have to do. But that's really only there to structure the game so that it's not all over the place. And so, the folks that I've been reading on the internet that are proponents of the idea of video games as an art form are generally talking about the plot that's being written for these video games. But the plot, it seems to only be there to tie it together, to have a reason for being there.
And what I've seen in video game plots, it's always just an excuse for action. I mean, it's we're gonna put this guy here, and we're gonna have him do something exciting that the player can play through. And that's really the extent that I've ever seen a decent plot go with.
Yeah. And so you haven't seen a lot of video games that you would consider to be character driven. Well, and how can they be? Because you, the player, are the character. You're the person controlling it. So I would say for me, you're talking a lot about timing, and I'd say for me, part of the problem with video games being an art form is that they're interactive. Name another thing that is considered an art form that is interactive. I can't think of one.
That's true. And even when you do have things that are slightly interactive, those choose-your-own-adventure movies
art.
or books, they're not hard.
Yeah, and let's not sit here and pretend that every single thing in every single, genre, or not genre, but medium, that is considered an art form, that every medium, everything in it is an art form, right? I mean, there are movies that are not art. There are books that are not art. There's a lot of albums, Vince, hate to break it to you, that aren't art.
This is true.
In fact,
very true.
I can't think of a lot of albums that are art.
Most of them are just patterned to get people to buy them.
No, I'm kidding. There's tons of music I listen to that I consider art. But
well, true, but I wouldn't say it all is.
But and of course, film. Most film, is hard to call art. But again, I think a lot of it also depends on what's your definition of art. Yeah. What is art?
Art. That's a good question. What is art?
Yeah.
What do you think art is, Jay?
That's tough. It's like a giant. It's like what is love? It's just a
Baby, don't hurt
to...
me. Don't hurt me no more.
it seems to be a difficult question to just answer in a sentence or two. But I'd say that the definition of art depends on the medium.
Yeah, that's a good point.
For instance, you and I write fiction, and generally, art in fiction seems to be synonymous with whether or not it's character driven.
Right.
And so if you need something to be character driven, to be thematic, to have themes, to be talking about real people. To be talking, and not like people who actually exist, but just talking about things that are real, ideas that speak to people. You know what I mean? And that's what makes those things art. But then like painting, what's art in painting? All kinds of people have ideas about what art is in painting. Modern art doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything. And yet they're still calling it art. It's interesting because it seems like a lot of books aren't considered art, and yet everything that's ever been written down is just called art. To be an artist, you have to draw things, and it doesn't matter what they mean. It's just you're just drawing things. Modern art. I once went to a museum. I think I've told you this story.
Once. Just once.
I once went to this. Well, no, this one museum I went to one time. I went to this museum, and they had an entire section of modern art, and they had this piece of wire that was in the shape of an octagon on the wall. It was like maybe 12 inches in diameter. And guess what it was called? Wire octagon.
Creative. You see what it's doing is it's symbolizing the corporate entrapment of America.
and this is what we in the field of art. I'm just kidding.
He did the air quotes.
Yeah. Call reaching. Digging a little too deep. Anyway,
to extend this idea
to... So what is art? Is it possible? Though you and I, and again, we don't play a lot of role-playing games, and the folks that I've read that are trying to be, that are proponents of video games can be an art form, are mostly talking about role-playing games. So, even though you and I haven't found one, is it possible? Can someone someday make the video game that turns the corner, that makes that medium become an artistic medium?
I think it's possible, but I think the problem that you run into is if you're going to make it artistic, you have to take the control out of the player's hands.
And then it's not a video game.
And then it's no longer fun anyway.
That's right.
Because the major thing about any video game at all, I don't care what it is it's got to be fun. As I said, 10 hours of whacking droids with vibro blades just doesn't strike me as fun.
This whole idea, in the first place, came from an article by Roger Ebert about the Hitman movie. And I read this a couple months ago, and he actually gave the Hitman movie 3 stars, which I couldn't believe. I looked it up because I was gonna watch the movie. I haven't seen it yet, and I don't know if I'm going to. Basically, the reason I looked it up, by the way, is because I started playing the Hitman video games, and I love them. They're a lot of fun, and they scare me because I'm playing Hitman, and I'm trying to kill people without being seen, and then somebody sees me, and then they start shooting at me, and I'm like, crap, I messed it up, and now they're gonna find out. It's scary. Anyway,
it's a lot like simulated murder.
The game kind of it's simulated murder. It's fantastic. But not art. Anyway, so, Ebert gave it 3 stars, and I was really excited about that, and then ultimately, the irony is, the reason I didn't see the movie was because then I read Ebert's review, and even though he gave it 3 stars, what he basically said about it was that it's more character-driven than any video game movie he'd seen, and that as an espionage kind of movie, it wasn't bad, but the problem with it for him was that it was more about the body count. Mm-hmm. It was more about the violence than it was about the characters.
Which is what a video game is.
Exactly, but not what a movie has to be. And I would submit that a movie based on a concept of a video game could be art.
This is true. I think so too.
I think that's quite possible, and apparently it hasn't been done yet. I want to quote from the end of his review, the final paragraph. He says this, and like I said, this is what gave me this idea to talk about this, and this. Excuse me. This paragraph itself is also what's caused a lot of video game fans to post on a bunch of message boards and stuff about this, and people are calling Ebert, an old guy who doesn't know what he's talking about. He's behind on the times, and the reason he doesn't think video games can be an artistic medium is because he's old, doesn't play them, and doesn't know what he's talking about. And you and I are in our early 20s, and not old and senile, and we agree with him.
This is true. This is true.
But, again, we also don't play the kinds of video games that these folks are playing.
That's right.
So, anyway, this is what he says. This is the final paragraph of his, what do you call
review.
It? Review. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word review. And if you want to read this, go to rogerebert.suntimes.com. Here's the paragraph. The movie is rated R, despite reports that the studio demanded edits to trim down the violence. It has a high body count, but very little blood and gore. I wish it had less. It's the people we care about in movies, not how many dead bodies they can stack up. Hitman stands right on the threshold between video games and art. On the wrong side of the threshold, but still give it credit. I don't know, that's the nicest thing you can say about a video game movie, I think. That's
pretty elegantly put, I would say.
Yeah, I think so too. And I really agree with it as far as video game movies I've seen, because I haven't seen this movie.
I'd like to point out that earlier we established that art is really defined by whatever medium it is in.
I think so, yeah.
So therefore, video games being a medium, but then again, I suppose you would have to have the argument of an artistic medium defines whether or not it's art.
Yeah, basically, somebody would have to come along and give a definition to what makes a video game an artistic video game.
That's right.
Video games have a lot of can have artistic qualities to them, and there's a lot of people who are involved in making one. So, the visual aspects can be very artistic. Somebody can write very artistic music for a video game.
That's right.
Somebody can potentially write an artistic storyline, but if it's too character-driven, it's no longer about the gameplay, and then it's a bad video game.
Right.
So it seems like if you took a video game and made it artistic for the reason that a film or a book would be artistic, it would no longer be fun. It would no longer be a video game, and therefore it couldn't be an artistic video game because now it's an artistic something else, but not a video game. So it's kind of complicated. I don't know what an artistic video game would even be.
Wouldn't be a video game. I want to bring this up, and as I think I've brought up The Punisher in every podcast.
Yeah, I think you have too.
But I played the Punisher video game last year, which was written by Garth Ennis, and significantly different than anything Garth Ennis does. It was all an excuse for action, as I've said at least twice now.
Yeah, sure.
But where Garth Ennis would have these interesting plot lines that, would include action into the plots, the video game just put you in a scenario and said, shoot people. And that was it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what Hitman does. And Hitman has an overarching plot, and there are, and Hitman has a backstory, and there are reasons he does what he does, and stuff like that. But as far as the narrative, if you will, of the video game itself, I mean, it's in levels, Vince. It's got you go to this location, and then you go to this location, and then you go to this location, and so it's not structured like a narrative. It's not beginning, middle, end. It's just the plot is an excuse to get you to the place where you have to assassinate the person you have to assassinate.
That's a good point. The idea of levels even takes away from the idea that it's art. I was talking to a writing professor / playwright from Arizona State. I believe it's Arizona State. His name was Jay Boyer, I believe. It's been a few years now. But he said that for any given play, the idea is that you need to blend your scenes together to where the audience doesn't know that they're scenes. Therefore, in video games that have such rigidly separated levels, Mario, Hitman, anything,
how can that Mario and Hitman in the same sentence?
That's right.
That's hilarious.
But it works because they're all rigidly separated.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, role-playing games very often aren't so levelly, right? Or are they? I mean,
I would disagree with that.
They're at least not numbered,
I mean, let's look at the standard, Final Fantasy.
Okay, sure.
Every Final Fantasy game that I've seen people play, and I've watched people play a lot of these, they always have working up to a boss, defeat the boss, and then you do it again until you get to the very last one.
Right, and so this structure makes it difficult to have a narrative structure.
I mean, because where in real life, where would you actually overtake a boss in any given level? I mean, it's like Mortal Kombat the movie. Yeah. We have a little bit of plot, and then we have somebody fight, and then that one's resolved. It moves on to the next.
Street Fighter's kind of the same way. and you know what our problem. But you know what ultimately our problem with this is, Vince? We're putting these in terms of narrative. We're putting these in terms of what makes a good film and what makes a good book, and trying to say that video games aren't art because of that.
That's true.
But the problem is, if we were going to figure out what an artistic video game was, it would have to have different conditions.
You know what
and I don't know what that definition would be, because it's interactive, and again, I think the fact that it's interactive is what makes it so difficult for me to see that it could be art.
I think what we're really establishing here is when people put up an argument for video games as an artistic medium, what they're really basing their argument on is the narrative. And what we're really establishing here is that narrative in video game does not make a video game artistic.
Right.
And I would have to say that if you're going to make a truly artistic video game, it's going to have to be unique. The gameplay is going to have to be something that nobody's ever seen before. Yeah. It's going to have to be intuitive and interesting, and it cannot rely on a plot.
Well, and why do you think people are trying so hard to give us this idea that video games are an art form? I mean, they want us to take it seriously. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of things that I'm not sure are art that people take seriously.
Agreed.
I mean, I'm not sure that I have to buy that video games are artistic for me to review a video game seriously.
Yeah. I mean, art to me is this elitist thing.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And we live in a culture that isn't necessarily established between highbrow and lowbrow. People don't use that terminology anymore so much.
That's right.
We live in a world where people don't read poetry anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it's a different world. And video games it's a commercial medium, just like film, just like books. I mean, it's a big commercial medium that employs a lot of people. And there are people that write video game reviews for a living, and these people take video games very seriously.
And there's no reason why you shouldn't, even if it isn't art.
Yeah, it exists to be enjoyable. And so what makes a video game a good video game is that it's very enjoyable, and that the gameplay works, and all of that sort of thing. So, I mean, there are, just like anything else, there are things you have to do to make sure that your video game is good. There are rules to follow. It's very interesting. It's just like writing a good book and stuff. There are established conventions for making a good video game, and yet I don't think it's art. But I don't think it has to be.
That's right.
And that's why my favorite video games are the ones that don't need plot, or the ones where I don't have to know what the plot is.
Alrighty, it looks like we're gonna have to stop pretty soon.
Yeah, it's about time for us to finish this up. I think we'll forego the 2-minute rants this week.
Okay.
Because we're a little bit over. We're actually getting right to time. We'll do the 2-minute rants again next week, and because I figured this discussion would take us most of the time because it's a good one. And I figure maybe sometime we'll bring this one back. I'd like to get some guest hosts on with us. Maybe some folks that disagree with us, just to see what the other side of this argument is.
Oh yeah. That's all I have to say. Just yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Vince-topher Walken.
Are we really going to have to start calling you that?
No. And I'm Vince.
All right. We'll see you next week on Geek Speak the Podcast.